Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, a.k.a. PD Beats.
Hello, welcome to the Popternative podcast here on Blab. As always, I'm your host, Peter Remoliotis, and on Twitter I go as PD Beats. This is going to be a all radio themed episode of Popternative. We have three guests that two are have a lot of experience on radio as hosts, and another who was managing editor for a lot of blogs, but also is been dabbling on the radio from time to time as well. So I'm quickly going to introduce the panel. First, we have host of the Pipeline Show on TSN 1260. We have Guy Flaming with us. Guy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We then have a host and a play-by-play guy for TSN 1200 here in Ottawa. We have AJ Jakubec is with us. AJ, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Perfect. And last but not least, of course, we have the managing editor of SportLogiq, and we have a contributor for Sportsnet and RDS. Andrew Berkshire is with us on Popternative. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure to be here.
No problem. So yeah, it's going to be a radio show. We're going to have discussions about radio. Before we get into the meat and potatoes, let's go around and have you guys give your opening remarks and tell us a little bit about yourselves to the rest of the panel and the viewers. Andrew, let's start with you.
Sure. I used to be the managing editor of HabsEyesOnThePrize.com. Did that for 2 years. Now I work for an analytics company called SportLogiq and work through them for RDS and Sportsnet in our digital contracts, writing analytical articles with our data. And I also host a podcast called Ice Level with TSN 690 talent Connor McKenna and Robin Flynn.
I met Robin Flynn at the Clarkson Cup in Ottawa.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, she was really cool. And Connor McKenna was supposed to come on the show, but he ended up not being able to. There was traffic and he wasn't able to make it at 9. But hopefully to have him on soon. Very quickly, too, can you tell us a little bit about SportLogiq? You mentioned it's an analytics company. Could you just give us a little bit more of a background about that very quickly?
Yeah, basically SportLogiq is a company that instead of using data script stuff to pull data from already tracked stats through the NHL, it uses video recognition software to create our own data, and we track around 3,000 events per game. So anytime a player reaches to do a stick check, that's recorded, and whether or not he was successful or whether or not he failed. Every time a player makes a pass, that's recorded, what kind of pass it was, whether it was off the boards, whether it was D to D, or whether it was out of his zone, whether it successfully cleared the zone. All that stuff is tracked and put into a giant database where we can look at how players performed over time compared to their teammates, compared to the league average. It's basically everything that happens on the ice now, we track automatically through software.
Really cool. No, that's really cool.
Oh. It's like the Fox puck on steroids.
Exactly.
Oh, that Fox puck.
As long as it doesn't start glowing. So, AJ, you're a play-by-play guy and a host here in Ottawa, where I'm currently living at TSN 1200. Any opening remarks? Yeah, I mean, just excited to be here. I mean, I kind of do anything and everything from 67's play-by-play to Senators backup play-by-play to Senators pre- and post-game work to Ottawa Fury FC soccer to Ottawa Red Blacks play-by-play, basketball play-by-play, hosting shows. Used to work with Guy at Edmonton, so this is a pleasure reuniting with him.
It's a reunion.
That's where I'm from originally, but Ottawa's home now, and spent some time in BC and Saskatchewan as well. So just love working sports, love working radio.
Great. And Guy Flaming is with us, and he didn't remember, but Guy Flaming and I met at the Memorial a couple years back.
Man, I'm never going to live that down.
No, it's all good. And Guy Flaming is the host of the Pipeline Show on TSN 1260, and what's really interesting about that show, Guy, is that's because it's Edmonton, there's a focus on Edmonton Oilers as well, but it's a prospect show. It's about junior hockey, correct?
Yeah, it's 100% junior hockey, junior college hockey. It's the basic premise of the Pipeline Show is we're talking about the future stars of the NHL, where they're at now. So we're talking to 17, 18-year-old kids, guys who are before they're drafted. It doesn't matter whether if they're playing in the Q or the OHL, the WHL. As far as I know, we're the only show in Canada that dedicates a segment every week to the NCAA for college hockey, as well as we talk USHL hockey as well. We get a little flack sometimes for that north of the border. Why we talk so much hockey that's not major junior, but we talk junior A as well, BCHL, AJHL, go across with the RBC Cup, and so that's the focus of the Pipeline Show. And everything I learned from AJ is about my heritage.
I was wondering if something about that was going to be mentioned.
It's like he was like
well,
the
that's
model.
why I decided to grow the beard. I wanted to look as close to Guy Flaming as possible. So.
Touche.
All right, so Guy and AJ both have a lot of experience in radio. Andrew, you dabble in radio from time to time. That's correct, right?
Yeah, I do guest spots on different radio shows and my own podcast as well, which isn't live, but it used to be at one point.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I thought it would be really appropriate to, talk about Popternative. It's a social media centric show, so we like to link everything back to social media somehow. But radio, the landscape is completely different now. There's so much we could talk about in terms of that. I have a lot of specific questions, but right off the bat, what I just said, the changing landscape of radio, pros and cons. Guy, let's start with you. Like, what do you, see from 5-10 years ago to now with the implementation of social media and the interaction that you can have with callers? It's a whole different game now, right, Guy?
It really is. And for my show is a little different. We don't take calls. Our show is guest driven, but now with the advancement of social media, whether it's usually Twitter, but we get a lot of texts as well. That's become a big part of the show, is the interaction with the audience that's listening immediate. So the immediate feedback, and it becomes more of a, instead of me talking to a guest on the phone and just sending it out there and not knowing if it's reaching anybody, now it's become a three-way conversation where I'm talking to a guest, but I'm also getting feedback from an audience. And so it's become a lot more interactive for sure.
Mm-hmm. AJ, what do you think about that concept of the three-way conversation that Guy mentioned?
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be able to get feedback, the way we do. I mean, we kind of take it, like, for example, on a Senators post-game show or on, a midday or an afternoon show when I'm filling in there, we're taking calls, which, I mean, that used to be it, right? You take calls. Then all of a sudden, oh, wow, emails. So now it's calls and emails. Now it's calls, emails, texts, and tweets. So it's good to be able to get reaction from various people, because I think, 20 years ago after a game, if you're doing a team's post-game show, you're relying solely on phone calls. You can check out just on Twitter to see what the fan base is thinking, regardless of what they're saying to you, just what they're thinking in general by going on there. And I think that's great. To me, the business is changing so much, and there's so much catching up to do as well. When you look at, more people are consuming radio than ever, but advertising dollars have dropped because there aren't ways to adequately count how many people are listening, because not everyone now is listening just on the radio. They're listening on their phones. They're listening through various mediums, and unfortunately the technology to count that hasn't really caught up yet. So it's a changing media. There certainly needs to be more changes to how people, and TV's going through the same thing as well, right? And in terms of ratings and how they count it. But, I think it's all for the better. And, hopefully some of that stuff is figured out in the next few years.
Yeah. And Andrew, you're someone who you mentioned has eye on the prize. And that is a big thing about that is I don't think it's considered. Is it fair to say that Habs on the Prize started the origin of it as like a fan-driven blog?
Oh, absolutely. And I think to at least a certain extent it still is. And that's one of the beauties about the way that the internet works now and the way that blogging has become almost mainstream, is that fan doesn't necessarily mean unbiased. I think you'll find some of the most critical and most analytical articles about the Montreal Canadiens specifically on Eyes on the Prize over the last several years, examining what went wrong this season, what led up to it. I mean, I think we kind of called that this was going to happen a long time ago if Carey Price ever went down. So you can see that kind of stuff there. It's not just the typical fanboy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Not just limiting to sports, though, and we can go around the panel for this one. But and Andrew, I want to start with you. You know, you look at a lot of radio shows. You know, whether it's a show like Guy that's just guest driven, but other shows that have a lot of callers and all that. Having a really big show and having really big Facebook or social media accounts, that's that's another whole job added to being a radio show host. Let alone you have to, you're not just monitoring the action online, on air, but also online, right, Andrew? So it's a whole different dimension has been added to radio.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is, especially with radio, is that it's no longer just local competition, right? If somebody's listening on their app, even through their car, if they have Bluetooth in their car, a lot of people still listen through their phone, right? So you could, if you don't like what you're hearing on your local radio station for sports, you could tune into another city's radio station. And so it's a lot tougher competition. You have to constantly be on there. And I think engaging in social media is a good way to get those listeners to be loyal to you. You give them something more than what you can give them just on a live radio. Because sometimes when you're talking for a long time, at a certain point, you can repeat yourself a little bit. You can make mistakes because it can be tiring to be perfect, and and nobody's going to do a 4-hour radio show and not make any mistakes, and you're going to be taken to task for that on social media. And if you respond poorly, maybe that person who didn't like it isn't going to listen again. So you got to be able to figure out when to draw the line on to defend what you said or to do a mea culpa or explain what you were saying. And it can be tough.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that, AJ?
You know what? It's great. I love just the options that people have as consumers now, whether it's writing options. Like if you're looking for a good piece, it doesn't matter if it's someone that's part of the New York Times, someone that's part of ESPN.com, or someone that's just blogging on their own. So that's good. And I think it forces everyone to be better. It forces us to be better as broadcasters, that people that, hey, they might just start their own podcast, and you're competing not just with other radio stations, but just every form of entertainment out there. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for consumers. It's like the whole, I kind of compare it a little bit to the whole Uber cab thing, right? I mean, it just forces everyone to get a little more competitive, a little better. And if someone is out there and wants to do their daily podcast and they're not part of the radio station or part of a TV station, that's great. That means we've got to do our job better. So I think it's all good for consumers. And again, it's just a matter of, because like I said earlier, because people are listening to more radio than ever. Again, it's just it's one of those things where they have to find out, and whether it's the people selling it or regulating it or whatever, they have to find a better model to calculate who's listening to it. And I think it surprises me in 2016 that we don't have a better model. I mean, for example, in Ottawa, ratings are calculated through diary. In Montreal, for example, ratings are through a PPM system. Well, the PPM is antiquated. It's already antiquated. Meantime, we're like 2 steps antiquated. So like it doesn't make sense that we wouldn't be on top of this a little bit more as an industry. I know there's major talks going on with the CRTC in the next couple of years to see what they're going to do about this. But first and foremost, I think it's better for everyone as consumers. They've just got to find a better way to track who's listening to what, and then I think everything from a revenue standpoint will be a little bit better.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting concept. And you mentioned it really quickly, AJ. You said there's people are consuming radio as much as possible, but there's also like podcasts like this as well. Guy, here's a question for you. And this is something social media marketers are asked all the time, because branding yourself on social media, there's so much competition, saturation out there. Radio shows, podcasts, right? To kind of stand out, what do you think needs to be done in the digital age as well? You know, the content obviously is important, but are there any tricks or things that you think radio shows or hosts are doing that is making them stand out?
Well, I can only speak for myself and for my show, and my show is, the Pipeline Show, is very specific in our topic. We don't talk NHL. You know, I mean, we're in Canada, we're in Edmonton. There's lots of stuff to talk about, but every other show on TSN 1260 does that stuff. So to be different, all we do is talk junior and college hockey. So I think there's a drawback to it. We're a niche show. So if you don't care about junior hockey, you're never listening to my show, which is unfortunate, but that kind of goes, that's part of the job, right? So to be different, we have different content. And I think we're unique in that regard, not just in Canada, well, and certainly in the States, there's no show like mine as far as I know. But with the addition of college hockey and the USHL and things like that, I think we're different in this country as well. So it's trying to stand out and be an alternative to what is basically a hockey-driven market, at least in Edmonton. I'm guessing it's similar in the other NHL cities like Ottawa as well, where it's the NHL and everything else is a distant second. But I want to go back to something AJ mentioned in a couple of minutes ago about taking post-game calls and getting back to the social interaction with text and Twitter instead. AJ, I mean, you know how many calls you get after a hockey game, and half the fans that are calling in are hammered from being at the game, and the quality of interaction there is terrible. I mean, post-game show call-ins, the phone calls normally are really bad. I mean, it's a frustrated fan or just their ideas are out to lunch. You can't weed those out until they're on the air, right? And you try to hit the hang-up button as soon as possible. But with texts and tweets, you can weed out all the garbage and just have good content. So I think that's really helped radio shows be better.
Guy, I just got to tell you, be careful what you say about the Charlottetown Islanders and the Quebec Romparts, because two members of the show have just joined to watch the show. Mitchell Balmas and Derek Gentile are both watching Popternative right now.
All right.
Just one thing to follow up on what Guy says. I think I agree with what you say to a certain extent, but I also think there's something to be said about the post-game caller who's mad after the game, right?
That's great.
I mean, it's one thing for me to read that text, but, you know, we had, like, for example, last year, and, you know, Andrew would remember this as well as anyone covering the Habs, the Mark Stone incident on PK Subban. I mean, we had a grandma call up threatening to whack Matt Bradley, who was working as my post-game analyst for the Washington Capitol, on the wrist, and see how he felt after he whacked. She said she was like 76, and I'm going to grab my grandson's hockey stick and whack you over the wrist. That's something you don't get through text. But I agree with you, because if you get the same old type of response over and over and over, then you can go into emails and texts and say, okay, well, what haven't we looked at here today? Yeah. And that's where you make it a better show. But I think they all contribute to being a better show. Yeah, I mean, sometimes some of those callers are bad, but sometimes the bad callers are, you know, like I know just from listening, sometimes you're listening and you're saying, oh, man, this is terrible, but you're also partially entertained. It's kind of like a car crash.
Yeah, fair enough.
Andrew, Montreal. That's all I have to say. You know what I mean? The radio shows, what Guy mentioned about the post-game calls, born and raised in Montreal, those, you know, those angry, furious fans about Alexei Kovalev, or, you know, going down to the Martin Rushinsky days. I remember, you know, they weren't happy. That's a big market. That's a tough, sensitive market, right, Andrew, for that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've listened to post-game shows last season where people called in saying they wanted Carey Price gone still. You know, like he wins the Hart Trophy, and people are like, this guy's a bum. Never makes the big saves. So at a certain point, like, nothing's going to be reasonable, right? After a loss, I think sometimes you get those gold angry guys that AJ was talking about. That they just go on these huge rants, and it's kind of refreshing because it breaks the monotony of like whatever conversation that you were having, or like certain guests who all want to say the same thing, and it's just some crazy guy that calls in, and then you can talk about that for a while, and you're like, wow, we're going to remember that call forever. But I find most of the time the angry guys, it's like the same few points over and over again, like, oh, the team's too small, they're not tough enough, goalie didn't stop enough shots, hate on the superstars, and it's pretty predictable.
The big one here, when you talk about Carey Price and people wanting him gone, the big one here, and we've been hearing this for the last few years, is you get probably half a dozen to a dozen people a year saying that Erik Karlsson should play forward. That's one of my favorites. It's only won 2 Norris trophies, but they should move him up to forward.
And he should win 3. He should have this one wrapped up. And obviously he's not going to. I mean, it seems like every media guy wants to push for Drew Doughty, but it just blows my mind. He can put up 82 points. And everyone's like, oh, well, look, let's go for the guy who put up 51 instead, because he might be a little bit better defensively.
Well, you look at situations too, and AJ, I don't want to get into that as much, but the Ottawa Senators, I was just talking to a couple of my friends. Ottawa Senators, I think, have 5 players this year that had 50-plus points up front for the Ottawa Senators. Like, the offense wasn't an issue. And I hear people come on the show, and I hear, Ian Mendes talking, and they're like, the offense was an issue. The offense was not an issue, right? It becomes a point now, and then social media is a new vehicle for more stuff like that to be said. So it's like, if it was bad enough, like, when I was growing up, all these guys talking, coming on shows, being really upset and yelling. Look at now the era of social media. Like, it's way worse. There's more opportunity there.
Well, I've already basically, like, I don't even wade into the Karlsson Doughty thing anymore. Not because
that's for that. We could do a whole podcast on that incident.
Well, that's the thing, and it's become such a polarizing topic, and I finally had enough watching one of the Sharks games against the Kings where Doughty was struggling, and it just became a referendum on like Drew Doughty's a real good defenseman. Erik Karlsson's a real good defenseman. You know what? I don't really care about the Norris Trophy. I know it's a prestigious honor, but me, I just want to watch the Stanley Cup and be entertained by that. But that's one, I guess, drawback of social media, right? Is sometimes on your timeline you see like 200 people during a Sharks Kings game debating Drew Doughty, Erik Karlsson again, which has been debated to death for 4 months. And finally, I'm just like, no mas. I want no more part of it. I said that night on Twitter that I hope Radko Gudas wins the Norris Trophy this year, just to see the outrage amongst the Kings and the Senators fan bases.
Radko Gudas, the legend.
or Rob Scuderi. I'd settle for that too.
Oh.
Hey, Scuderi. No, Gudas could play on my team any day of the week. He's a great WHLer.
Dunford Silvertip.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there's, I think it's a tough situation too, where like the freedom of speech and all that is something. But I remember Jeff O'Neill went on Leafs Lunch once and was just going off about, like, he's like, who do these people think they are? Tweeting at me saying I don't know what I'm talking about. That's what he said. Like, and I quote, that's what he said. And I see, and Andrew, I've seen a lot of your tweets, and you must have a lot of opinions about this, but this whole concept that social media has allowed for more people to become bloggers or to have their own show, right? There comes a point though where do we, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you have to be careful what you say on social media and how you present yourself, especially if you want to present yourself as a brand that someday will come on and be a host of a show on TSN 1260. There are a lot of people, in my opinion, have to be careful because, you have the right to say things and to be edgy and to have your integrity, but there's a line that obviously does not, like, should not be crossed, but that gets crossed anyway.
Yeah, it is a little bit tough, and you have to remember especially when you're really new to it, that you have to make enough of an impact and get people interested in what you're saying without disrespecting the people that you might eventually be working with. And that's something that I think everybody kind of learns. Like, you can tell the people who are new to it are less respectful. And then once you've been doing it for a couple of years and you meet some of the people who've been doing it for a lot longer than you have, then you realize some of the stuff that they deal with all the time and that they might know a lot more than you about something, which is something that young people obviously struggle with a lot, not admitting that they don't know everything. I think social media does allow for a greater diversity of opinion, though. And for Jeff O'Neill, he's a guy that I think plays a little bit of a character on his show. I don't think that he truly believes all the things that he says. Like, I've heard him go on rants about a player having no compete level, and it's like Jeff O'Neill talking about that. He's like one of the most inconsistent performers in NHL history. Like, super talented, but super inconsistent and constantly dogged his entire career for not trying very hard. So, like when he's criticizing a guy like Alex Semin, it kind of rings hollow. But at the same time, are you going to like tell him to F off on Twitter because he disrespected, some guy that you write about all the time? You can't do that. You have to come at it a different way. And you can be respectful while still taking down somebody's opinion. It's just a matter of learning how to do that and not making the guy who you're talking to really angry.
The one thing I'll add to that, wouldn't that give him even more of an understanding of which guy's dogging it, though? Like, I think it's one of those it takes one to know one type of things. And I think a lot of times we end up kind of ripping ex-players or ex-managers or ex-coaches or whatever for being a little bit out of touch. And sometimes, it rings true, but they also bring a different perspective. That's the one perspective that none of us, my failed junior B hockey career aside, I mean, we still don't know what it takes or what it's like to be in that room. And that's one of the things that those guys bring to the table, right? That we don't. And that's why I think it's important to listen to all different perspectives. And you might have your own opinion, but, I find a lot of people on social media do too much talking and not enough listening. And, like for me, I'm very pro analytics. I think there's so many different things that it brings to the table that we don't understand, that we never did understand. And, a lot of times, like, there might be a guy that I'm not really sold on, and all of a sudden I look at the analytics and it says, you know what, maybe I need to give this guy a second or a third look because the numbers are telling me otherwise. But I also think that there's the opposite of that as well, because a lot of times some really heavy data-driven people don't like some of the intangibles, and the guys who are there, they understand, especially if they won, they understand some of those intangibles that work as well. And I think there needs to be a little more of a combination of both and an acceptance of old school and new school. The people that accept both, I think, are probably a little bit further along. But you know what? Like, you just keep learning. You just keep evolving. You just keep listening to different things. And if you stop listening to stuff, then you're the one that's going to be falling behind.
I think a lot of times, I mean, Twitter especially, I think, is a breeding ground. It's almost like a message board, or what message boards have evolved into, where it's guys are just trying to stir the pot, right, by yelling at people, celebrities, or guys like Jeff O'Neill. It's always easy for somebody to say you're an idiot and not back that up with anything. It's just the stereotypical guy in a basement yelling at his computer, basically. I think a lot of it has to do with credibility. A guy like Jeff O'Neill has credibility because he's a former NHLer. He knows what it's like because he's been there, and there's only
30 goal scorers.
Exactly. I mean, so when he says, "Who is this guy to tell me that I'm wrong?" I mean, there is something to that. I mean, he has built-in credibility, and I think what Andrew was talking about early on, for new guys who come into the blogging world or get into podcasts, they got to put in their time, and they can't just jump into it right away and be the expert. I think you have to earn your position and earn your stripes, so to speak. And I know I get asked all the time about players. but I'm quick to say I'm not a scout. I watch a ton of junior hockey and college hockey, and listen, I do color on the Edmonton Oil Kings broadcast, so I'm at all their games, their home games at least, and I watch a ton of games. But I'm not a scout. Scouts are paid for their knowledge, and they have the ability to pick players apart and project what they're going to. I have an opinion, but I'm not a scout. So I'm quick to say, listen, I'm not a scout. I talk to scouts. I get scouts on my show, and I'll base my opinion a lot on what I see with my own eyes, but finish it off with the opinions of the experts because they have the built-in credibility because they do that job for a living. So I think that's the difference when somebody gets into this job to start with. I think they really got to put in their time and learn, follow what other people have done, talk to the people who have done it before, and learn your job.
And I think there's something to be said as well to have the humility to admit what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And that's something that you have to learn getting into the business.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
No, that's a really good point. And we've had so Andrew, a couple weeks ago, there was the whole NHL GIF ban stuff going on, that the NHL was going to ban GIFs. Pete Blackburn, who has been on the show before, is from Uprocks, is known for, creating a lot of GIFs and doing a lot, and his account just disappeared, and everyone was like, oh my God, they got rid of Pete Blackburn, but him and my regular face, Stephanie, their accounts showed up again. That's the thing I want to talk about too. Content creators, how do we, with a world where a lot of people, a lot of big, huge hockey accounts are essentially stealing content from the NHL, posting it on their website, and then boom, so many hits, right? Is it safe to say that aspect of social media is a real bad negative one? The concept of, the creativity can be there, but the creativity could also not be there. There could be a lot of laziness and a lot of, taking.
Well, I think it's tough because on the one hand, creating GIFs is definitely an easy way to be successful in hockey Twitter. It doubles the followers right away. But at the same time, creating good GIFs is rather difficult. And whether or not it's a bad thing to put them out there, that kind of content, I think that's free promotion for the NHL.
I agree.
And, maybe at one point they decided to crack down on it. I think everybody was afraid of that when Pete Blackburn and Steph's accounts were deleted. I still don't know exactly what went down there. I asked Pete, I texted him, he never texted me back. So maybe it was something and the NHL chickened out. I don't know. But I think it's a good thing, honestly. I think it helps people relive moments really quickly. It helps big moments go viral, go beyond just hockey fans when it gets a bunch of retweets. Because it's not getting put on ESPN, right? So there's got to be a way to get it into the Americans' hands and let the game grow down there.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up, Guy and AJ, too, is, memes as well, GIFs and memes. Like, for example, Hot 89.9 AJ in Ottawa, all they do on their Facebook, and it's not a bad thing, but if you go to their Facebook, it's memes, GIFs. That's all they post. And it gets traction, and it's really good. But now you're getting to a point now where radio shows and radio stations are acting kind of like what these fan blogs are known for. Tumblr was a really big website where, are you guys familiar with Tumblr at all?
Pictures.
A little bit.
Blog. It's a blog, and it was one of the first blog posts where you could post, GIFs and memes and reshare them, kind of like Twitter as well. But radio stations are acting like that. Radio shows are acting like that. The curated show, we get a lot of radio stations, retweeting not only our news but our GIFs, our creative stuff. It's a new radio is behaving a different way because of social media. True or false? Let's go around the panel about that statement. Guy, what do you think about that statement?
I would say, I think that's true. The difference between a meme and a GIF to me is that memes can be a little bit more mean-spirited. at times. More jokes attached to them, more picking apart guys and making fun of things. GIFs is just video evidence of something that occurred. So I think GIFs are more valuable and more positive for the NHL or for the Canadian Hockey League, whoever uses it. Memes might be a little bit more in that gray zone for me.
Mm-hmm. I think they're both useful in the sense that it drives people to the product, right? The more you see about it, it's free promotion for them. The more GIFs you see, that's a pretty nice goal. Hey, I might decide to start watching this game now. To me, that's driving people to the product, and that can only be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, what do you think about that? You commented about that before a little bit, but about the focusing not in general, but the radio. I want to talk about the radio aspect of it. Like radio stations, you go to their Twitter account and they're acting like, I find that fascinating. I find the evolution of the landscape of how radio stations are branding themselves very interesting.
Yeah, I think that the way radio is right now, anything that they can do to get people to go towards their content is a good thing. I think the dangerous thing is when the memes and stuff become the content, or, people go there for that. It has to be a vehicle, and this is a thing that we struggled with at Eyes on the Prize, right? Like, to build our social media on Facebook and Twitter, GIFs and different pictures and jokey kind of stuff went really well on social media. But we were using that to grow our analytical articles and our new news articles. So as long as there's still a goal to use that stuff to get to the better content, I think it's a good thing. But when it replaces the good content and it's just, the clickbait kind of stuff or the salacious radio rumor mongering, that's when there's a problem.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to discuss. That's a really, really good point. Like, when the memes become the content, because there are some situations, and AJ, you brought it up too. There's so many different. There's podcasts, there's radio shows. College radio is a huge. That's a huge area now where a lot of people have the ability to have their own show, do a lot of things, and use social media to hype it up. And you have apps like TuneIn Radio that, allow you to have access and discover all these things. And I just find everyone who works in radio or journalists, and Andrew, you would agree with me on this, and you would agree, you are going to have a lot of experience with social media, even though your job isn't social media coordinator or social media marketer, because it is a day-to-day part of your job, whether it's tweeting from your personal as a radio show host, whether it's running the Twitter account for your actual show or tweeting. It's part of the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah. And, that's something people don't realize. And there are people I know that started on radio that now do social media full time for really big brands. And how did they get that job? Well, they had a lot of experience when they were on radio shows managing social media accounts.
It's a very important part because it's kind of like promotion, right? And that's you look now, journalists, that number's gone down, and PR people, that number's gone up. So, there's a lot of room for people to work in this industry, but it's a very broad industry when you include social media and public relations and regular media. You got print media, you got television, you got radio, you've got social media, you've got so many different avenues that are kind of interrelated. And, in the end, it's important to be able to, if you're real good in social media, that's going to help drive your content. But the most important thing, and I think Andrew touched on this, most important thing is still the content, because you need quality content. And it's tough to get by on just one or the other. You need to be good in both, because if you have good content, but you're struggling in social media, well, you're kind of falling behind the times. But you need to be able to use social media to get people to your content and then keep them there with the content, which has to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% nailed it. And listen, I can only speak for myself, because full disclosure, I'm not a TSN employee. I buy my airtime from TSN in Edmonton, so I can't speak for the radio station. I do know that they have that they're pushing to get more feedback through their Facebook page and all that type of stuff. I know it's a priority for them, but I can only speak for myself. I don't have a Facebook page for my show. I do have a Twitter account, and that's really the extent of my own personal social media stuff. I don't do Snapchat or Instagram or anything like that either. Maybe it's because I'm old and getting gray here or what, but for me, it is still content is the most important part of the Pipeline show. And you know what, the Twitter for me is basically the way to interact with the audience, and as well as with text. But for me, it's still content. 100% is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's great. And I think we're gonna have to wrap up this episode of Popternative very quickly before we go. Andrew, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. I'm a big fan of what you do. What you did at Habs on Eye on the Prize. And I think the whole you doing that and shifting more to the analytics aspect of it is a really cool, interesting transition.
Thanks, man. It was really fun being on it. It was fun to meet Guy and AJ. You guys are great.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, AJ. Any closing remarks? Anything you want to plug in? This is your 20 seconds to shine.
No, I don't have anything to plug. Just great to be on the show. Great to meet Andrew and Guy. Always good seeing your mug.
Yeah, right.
Guy, closing
Yes,
remarks. It's your 20 seconds to shine.
Well,
And you can't apologize for not remembering me at Mem Cup. You can't do that.
Okay, fair enough. I will take the opportunity to plug the show. It's the Pipeline Show on TSN 1260. We have our own website. It's thepipelineshow.com. We archive every show, so you can check out our media archive at thepipelineshow.com. And the show is live on TSN 1260 Tuesday nights, 7 o'clock locally, so 9 o'clock Eastern time, as well, again, another live show on Saturday mornings, noon Eastern time, at 10 o'clock Alberta time.
Yeah. All jokes aside, though, Guy, I am a really big fan of the show. I think it's a fantastic product, and I think it's very good for growing the game and getting these kids exposures from the junior level. Like, I really applaud what you guys do. It's really good.
Well, I know from my perspective, there are a lot of really good media contacts throughout the Canadian Hockey League. There's some teams that need to work on that, but we really appreciate, I certainly appreciate when I can get a hold of the head office at the Q and get some assistance. So thank you for that.
Oh, for well, this has been Popternative. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, AJ. Thank you, Guy. You can watch previous episodes of Popternative on our YouTube page and our SoundCloud page. We will be back next week with New York Riveters professional goaltender in the NWHL and a cast member in season 1 of Hockey Wives, Jenny Scrivens, will be on the show. So that will be a very good episode. So thank you all. Have a great night and enjoy watching the playoffs and the World Hockey Championships that start next week. It's a lot of hockey's coming your way. Have a good night. Cheers.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.